So good evening, and thank you all for coming. I'm Joan Port, President of the League of Women Voters of Virginia. This is obviously being recorded, so if you do not want your lovely countenance to be recorded, you can turn your camera off, but we like to see faces. I think it's more friendly. So if you have no inclination, you can turn your camera on and be part of the community. This is Carolyn put in chat, your study is simply amazing, and I concur. This is a fantastic study done by our folks in Washington State who are tuning in today, and they are going to talk about this very important study and very important topic. So I'm going to turn this over to Alice Toussignon, who's the program chair for League of Women Voters of Virginia. Alice?
Okay, thank you. And thank you everybody for attending. As Joan said, we're recording it so others can hear it as well. I am going to introduce three people who are on this call, and then turn it over to Deanne, who will introduce the other two, because I believe right now there are five people from Washington State who participated in the study that are on the call, if I'm not wrong.
Correct.
So Deanne Finken is, she's on the Washington League board, and she's the person who led this study. Deanne was a reporter for the Fresno Bee for 12 years, a freelancer for the Oregonian, and directed the journalism program for Clark College in Southwest Washington before she retired. Joanne Lisowski has a PhD and a long career in multimedia journalism. She taught journalism and wrote a book, War on Words, Who Should Protect Journalists? I'm not kidding you when I say these people have a lot of professional experience on this topic. And Lynn Whitley has a BA in journalism from UNC Chapel Hill. You'll hear her talking about North Carolina a lot. She covered local news in North Carolina and Alaska for 10 years. But before I turn it over to Deanne to lead this presentation, I wanted to highlight a couple of facts that were in this. As Carolyn said, amazing report. Is one of the most thoughtful and well-researched and impressive reports I've seen in a really long time. But two facts I wanted to highlight that kind of bring it home to Virginia. And the first is from 2004 to 2020, 16 years, the US lost 25% of its newspapers, leaving news deserts. In Virginia, we have 7 counties that have no local newspapers. And then the second fact is from 2005 to 2020, newspaper staffing declined by 50% in the US. That's 50%. Virginia lost 57% of its local newspaper staff during that same time period. So this is a very important and timely topic that we're going to talk about tonight. And I want to let you know that during the presentation, feel free to put any questions in chat, which we will go over after the presentation. So let me turn it over to Deanne, who can introduce the other two folks from Washington, and then tell you about the study. Deanne?
Thank you, Alice. Yes, and I want to introduce two other committee members. Linda Hughes. Linda, could you wave your hand? Linda is a committee member from Bellingham, which is in the northwest part of Washington State. And Linda, what I think of every time I read the position brief in our position, I think of Linda, because she helped wordsmith it in a way that we'll talk about. Ideally, we'll talk about it at the end here when we talk about the positions and how we arrived at those. And she was very thoughtful in that. Our other committee member that I'd like to introduce is Carol Reichert, and I'm not seeing Carol. Oh, there she is. There she is. Carol's claim to fame. She is our data person. She was a person who was on the phone, in the weeds, all over, in terms of doing newspaper counts. She did hours and hours of research tracking down owners, publishers, circulation numbers, the number of days that papers published, all kinds of information. And she's currently in the midst of doing an update of that. You mentioned, Alice, some of the numbers about Virginia. And I started talking here about new research that just came out today from Northwestern University in Chicago. I am sure those numbers are higher. And I bet you could go online to Medill School of Journalism and track those down specific to Virginia, because they keep increasing. I also want to clarify that I was a co-chair of the committee that did this research. A colleague of mine, I think she was burned out, and so she's taken a step back from this work. But Dolores Irwin was very instrumental. She and I worked hand in hand. And I wanted to say this experience, and I'll stop talking here because I know Joanne's going to show a short video that she produced. But I wanted to say we worked. There were 12 of us, and there were 10 of us, and now there are 12 again on the committee. And this has been a real experience for me, understanding how we can all really work together for a common goal. Everybody has participated and everybody has given to this effort. And some of us were strong in one area and others in the other, and it was really valuable. So I'm going to see, Joanne, is that you trying to get the video up? Or
I was checking to see if I had share, and apparently I did, and I didn't realize it. So I apologize for putting my screen up there.
No worries.
So Joanne produced this, and this gives you a good overview. And then we want to talk about specifics about how we got consensus, about the consensus process and the position, because we're really hoping that Virginia League, State League, and Virginia local leagues will consider supporting our bid for for adoption by national convention this June. We want to
concurrence. We want concurrence.
Yeah, what did I say? I don't know.
That's all right.
That's right.
That's why I'm here.
Thank you. Everybody needs an editor. Joanne, go for it, please.
Okay, hi. Again, I'm Joanne Lasowski. I'm hoping you'll bear with me. As somebody already mentioned, Zoom changes these buttons sometimes, and you try to share something and the audio doesn't work. And so I'm going to definitely try. I'm optimistic that I have audio, although it doesn't say I do. So here it is. If I don't have audio, I'll start over.
There it is.
I think it should work.
Your screen, it's black right now.
Yes, should be.
Okay.
And you're not getting it full screen there. Is that better?
It's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, you're good.
Let's try. There's no sound. Yes?
Not yet.
But yet,
Yes?
No.
no.
Okay.
No sound.
So the sound isn't on. Okay, you are sharing your screen, but where's the audio? Oh, this is so embarrassing.
No, you're good.
No, it's not. It happens all the time. It's Zoom world.
Because they change the buttons.
Yeah, they do.
I'm going to stop the share. I'm going to try going back in again.
We all need to remember that computers and computer programs make our lives simple and easy, and we need to keep repeating it.
Over and over again as they spend our lives. Yes.
Well, it used to be up at the top that you would click. Your screen sharing is paused. Okay. Resume share. Boy, this might have to do something else.
We can do hand puppets. You know.
I saw the video. It's really, really good. I hope you can get this.
Deanne, do you want to try to find the YouTube?
Yeah,
And
I,
you could,
yeah, I have it. Let's see. Let's do, you're
yeah,
gonna,
let's try an
share.
alternative here.
let me share, or you're gonna.
I'm done, right? I've stopped, right? Sharing?
Yep, you
Okay.
stop sharing.
Okay, I'm gonna try,
And you have it on YouTube?
what are you seeing now?
We're seeing the league website.
Perfect. I'm gonna try to get to the page.
Yep,
There it is.
Okay.
Down
keep going.
This is
Bottom
our
right.
main page, our state main page, and this is actually good timing. If you will, if you want to see any more of our information here, along this top line, go to advocacy, because
Mhm.
now we have a position and we're doing advocacy. And at the very bottom, you'll see local news and democracy, I think. Why is it
Mhm.
not?
Yeah, it's on the very bottom.
Here it is. Okay. It's not, why can't I get it? It won't.
You just have to hold on it a little bit longer. Go back to advocacy and hold on it a little
Oh,
bit longer.
gosh. I hope they're not judging us on our.
I know.
Oh my
really.
God, no, don't
Down to
worry.
the bottom.
Don't worry
Keep
about it.
pulling it, pull it
Oh,
down
you-
further.
down
Oh,
on the
stay.
right.
Oh.
Close enough so far.
One
Well, you
more.
know you
Yes.
Try that one. There you
Okay.
There you go.
There it is.
is.
Let's hope
Drum
we can
roll.
get sound.
Is that good?
News is coming at you all day
You hear
from
it?
every direction.
Yes.
I can hear.
For you and your neighbors about your own community, your school board, city council, or your public health facilities. Between 2005 and 2020, 1/4 of the nation's local newspapers closed, leaving 1,800 communities with no local news outlet. Many studies show these closures have had a significant impact on our democratic system of government. The truth is, local news is in crisis, and it isn't just a journalism problem. It's now a democracy problem. Our 10-member local news committee from across Washington state decided it was a problem in need of an investigation. The charge of the local news committee was to explore this national problem from a local perspective. We wanted to uncover if local news outlets were disappearing at the same rate as other states. If so, were Washington residents experiencing the same known impacts on democracy? Our 2-year study began with a deep dive into the national research that identified local news was on decline and having troubling impacts on communities across the country. We explored the research conducted by Dr. Penny Abernathy, an academic researcher who wrote the book, News Deserts and Ghost Newspapers, Will Local News Survive? In addition, journalist Margaret Sullivan contributed to our research with her book, Ghosting the News. These books and their data resonated with our committee. As league members, we cared about an informed electorate and good government. Anecdotally, we also were keenly aware of what was happening in our own hometowns. Newspaper outlets were changing ownership, newspapers were skinnier, and coverage was dwindling. We interviewed more than 50 stakeholders, from local journalists to politicians, national media figures to local news publishers. Our review included more than 500 documents, academic studies, newspaper articles, opinion columns, magazine articles, and other reports. We took the lead from Penny Abernathy and focused on specific areas of influence. We found evidence that the decline in local news resulted in fewer candidates running for office, as well as fewer citizens being motivated to vote. Also, the lack of local news saw greater political partisanship among communities because citizens were only consuming national partisan news outlets. We also uncovered research that suggested that the lack of local news resulted in fewer citizens engaged in civic events. We found research and anecdotal evidence that the loss of local news left citizens with less vital information about public health. And finally, we found research that suggested when a community does not have a reliable local news outlet, banks are likely to raise interest rates on municipal loans because there are no watchdogs to follow the money. We were determined to uncover vital, specific evidence about our statewide communities. So we spent more than 1,000 woman hours researching and analyzing local news as a variable and how it corresponds with other community issues. One specific project demonstrated how the decline in local news affected voter turnout in all the counties in our state. Other original research demonstrated how many of our local newspapers have declined in weight while prices have risen. Our efforts included tracking circulation and staffing trends within the state. We collected data that offered a comprehensive look at closures of newspapers and changes in ownership. We found that our state was experiencing a loss of local reporters at a greater rate than the national average. We also examined a variety of potential measures to support and protect local news, such as legislation, nonprofit ownership, community partnerships, and philanthropy. After our study was reviewed by our local League of Women Voters State Board, we presented our findings to nearly every chapter in our state. We invited more than 2,500 members from across our state to weigh in on our findings. Our discussions were rich and enlightening. Members agreed local journalism was fundamental to democracy, especially today. The League of Women Voters of Washington believes it is the responsibility of the government to provide support for conditions under which journalism can survive and thrive. Our members agreed with strategies from local tax breaks to subsidizing citizen access to local news. Our committee then drafted positions based on our members' consensus. Our board of directors adopted the positions, and they were ratified at our state convention in 2023. The positions, as presented, state that the League of Women Voters of Washington support local news as fundamental to democracy. These positions also encourage education that informs our young people about news and media literacy, so they will understand the value of reliable local news to our community and our democracy. These positions also enforce the notion that control of content must remain with the news organization and not the government. As a result of these statewide efforts, the State League has advocated for one bill in our legislature that aligns with the position and is preparing to advocate for others. Through all of our efforts, we feel that our study that led to these statewide League of Women Voters positions have strengthened our ability to support local journalism and strengthened our democracy. We encourage you to review our report from the League of Women Voters of Washington, because it's not just a journalism problem, it's a democracy problem. The League of Women Voters of Washington will submit these positions as an item for concurrence at the National Convention. Stay tuned for information on that in time for your program planning meeting. Thanks for listening.
Oh, glad you got to listen.
It was wonderful.
I'm wondering, it must be because it's on YouTube that the sound is so bad, but we are having sound issues apparently.
I think we are. I'm going to stop sharing here. And now, of course,
Well, thank you too. Somebody just said it. Thank you. It was wonderful. Somebody said
Yeah.
it was wonderful. I wanted to thank them.
Joanne, you did a marvelous job on
Thanks.
it, and we are indebted to you. And I think it really does capture kind of the real big pieces of what what we did and what we found. And I wanted to just elaborate a little more. As we noted, we're going to seek concurrence. And my understanding is our state president, Mary Coltrane, will be sending a letter to state presidents and I think state board program directors in the next, well, I think at least by mid-December, to explain our request to complete. I think there is a survey that state leagues and local leagues will be asked to complete, and how you would go about indicating your support for our position. So please watch for that, if you would. And it's, you know, it's going through massaging right now. But I wanted to emphasize that this work does represent the sentiments of 2,500 Washington State League members. This was not one person who decided what we all should get behind. This really did reflect hours of study and review and discussion and debate, and sometimes heated debate. We presented this, you know, to all 21 leagues. I think we had about 17 that participated in the consensus process. I know we did workshops like this. We had a different video that people watched, and we discussed different aspects of it to at least 12, I want to say 12. We did either 12 online or in-person Zoom meetings across the state. And we provided 5 detailed consensus questions, and I will show you those consensus questions here shortly. And got people to talk about them, got them to respond. From those consensus responses, we had people submit them in writing in a survey. Then we took those responses to the consensus questions and drafted the position. And then our board adopted the position. And as Joanne reported in the video, the membership ratified the position at our May meeting. And we were able to lobby in support of a tax measure that gives, we don't have a Washington state income tax. We have what's called a business and operations tax. No, business and occupations tax. And this measure expanded a preference for newspapers. Well, Boeing is a big industry in the Northwest here. Boeing has long enjoyed tax preferences when it comes to the B&O tax. Newspaper publishers have had a B&O tax preference, but the legislature this year saw fit to extend that tax preference and actually eliminate it, full exemption for newspaper publishers. There were some specifics about how they would qualify for this. But this was passed, and it was passed with great bipartisan support in the legislature. A big key piece of that was our state attorney general got behind this and asked for this bill to be reintroduced and really was pushing for it. And he did ask the league to testify in support of this measure, and I think that helped. So we've already used the position, and we will be using it again as two measures come up related to media literacy in the legislature. We have a part-time legislature. They'll reconvene in January, and we plan to use our position to lobby in support of passage for local news media literacy development. In fact, Joanne, who has taught news media literacy, is working on a pilot program in Spokane public schools on the eastern part of the state to teach teachers how to do news media literacy training, and that's coming up in January and February. I think I'm going to show you the consensus questions. I don't know how many of you have gone through the consensus process. And maybe Alice, can you talk about that process a little bit? And while I go look for the consensus.
Sure. I mean, I'll just tell you, I went through it when I led our affordable housing study, and did something very similar to what Deanna is talking about, where we went around, we came up with a PowerPoint. We weren't as classy as you guys coming up with a video, but we had a PowerPoint, and which we sent to leagues, and we said we would present. And I think I presented at half of the league meetings and had consensus questions, and then came up with our positions.
Okay, yeah. So we share this to demonstrate what we feel is the integrity and the depth of our effort and our progress. I mean, yeah, it's flashy and all, but it also is deep and it's thorough. So these were the consensus questions that we had membership look at. one of the main missions of the League at all levels, national, state, and local, is to provide civic and voter education to communities. And we asked all 21, and we got responses from 16 or 17 leagues to that question. Consensus question 2. Many historians and scholars believe that freedom of the press, as enshrined in the First Amendment to the Constitution, implied that government had the fundamental obligation to see that journalism actually existed. And when we asked people, do you think this is a valid interpretation of the founders' intentions? Is it important that such an interpretation prevails today? We got some good feedback on this because there is mixed emotion, mixed sense about what the founders intended. They did, of course, make an amendment to the Constitution about freedom of the press. They also established a postal service with reduced rates for newspapers because, as Thomas Jefferson, said, give me newspapers without a government or government without newspapers, and I'll always go with the newspapers, right? I mean, I'm not quoting him exactly, but the idea how strongly they believed in having that access and support for that access. Do our local newspapers, as a cornerstone of a free society, are they essential to our democracy? Federal, state, and local governments have supported news publishers with tax breaks, postal subsidies, and the printing of public notices since before the country's founding. And we asked people to respond to these three questions. And we were careful, as I mentioned at the start, when we came up with a position reflecting the sentiments here, we were very careful with the language, and we'll talk about that here shortly. Because we are not saying in our position that government has a responsibility to pay or to bail out newspapers, only that it has a responsibility to ensure that conditions exist so that newspapers can survive and thrive. We're very mindful of the fact that everyone's not in agreement, and this allows different leagues to support different approaches. And number 5, the crisis of the local newspaper decline has affected residents who are poor and those who live in rural communities more than other populations. This is often due to increased subscription prices, limited internet connectivity, and device costs. The question is, the proposal is there should be support for ensuring access for all to local news. So those were our consensus questions. Now I'm going to try to go back to my notes here. And I think right now I should call up. I'm wondering if Alice, do you have access to our position there, or should I call that up?
You probably should call it up.
Alrighty, I will. Yeah, I know. I have to figure out a better way to operate here.
You mean the actual position paper?
The one that was in the
Yeah, let me see if I can.
Here, I think I have it now.
Oh, there it is, isn't it?
Oh, you got it? Okay.
And I realize, oh shoot, I have a lot of other documents open, but then, I had 2 boys who like to leave everything out, right? This is this is our position, and I think what we wanted to do is have Linda talk about the position in brief, and this is what allows us to advocate for different approaches to resolve, or at least to try to resolve, the local news crisis. Linda, do you want to start? You're muted. You're muted.
Okay. Read the position again, which Joanne stated, I think, in the 7-minute video, but our position in brief says the League of Women Voters of Washington believes it is the responsibility of the government to provide support for conditions under which credible local journalism can survive and thrive. And I just want to sort of consolidate all of the work that we did that went into these position statements. Just briefly go over that. Imagine going through 500 documents and understanding all of the importance of local news as it is declining, and interviewing over 50 people. And then also doing our own research related to the decline of local news and democracy. And then from that, we wrote the 130-page report that Alice alluded to, and consolidated that into 5 consensus questions and incorporated about 2,500, the feedback from 2,500 local League of Women Voters in Washington State, what their comments were. So we took that information and distilled it into the 6 positions that you see here. And the broad statement allows for great flexibility in enabling the League of Women Voters in each local and state and at the national level to advocate for what they think will be appropriate and will work within the state government that they have. And as Deanne said, in Washington State, it enabled us to testify in support of the exemption to the B&O tax for newspapers. So it's kind of interesting to think about. Here we are in Washington State on the opposite side of the country from Virginia, and we believe that what we have here will be of use to you in your community. And the study also documents the historical precedent for government support of journalism. And then the second part, the League of Women Voters of Washington defines local news as accurate, in-depth coverage of government entities, including but not limited to city councils, county boards of commissioners, health departments, schools, and school boards. There was much discussion, I think, as Deanne alluded to, in the consensus meetings throughout the state about how the news was covered, the need to differentiate between fake news and credible news, as well as the subjects that the news covered. Thus, the emphasis on accurate and in-depth coverage, and the positions identify a variety of public and governmental entities that affect the quality of life within each of our communities. So looking at information about city councils, county councils, and so on, that's what we hope the news will provide. So I think Lynn is going to talk about the first position and elaborate on that a little bit.
Thank you. Are you muted too?
The first position, you can hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. The first position, the League supports credible and ethical local journalism in whatever format it is published as essential to our democracy. In our study, we were very careful to define journalism, especially with the growth of social media and blogs and pink slime and misinformation and disinformation. This definition of journalism was very, very important. We turned to the American Press Institute that refers to journalism as information that features a systematic discipline of verification. That verification not only presents facts, but it presents the truth about the facts. As many of us in the study are or were professional journalists, we also referenced the Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics in our study. This is a statement of principles: to seek the truth and report it, to minimize harm, to act independently, and to be accountable and transparent. Deanne, how about number 2?
I want to go quickly here because I know we're going to run out of time, I think. Do we have an hour or an hour and 30?
Just an hour, right? I thought you guys needed to go to another meeting or something. Yeah. We just to go until 6:30.
Okay, and now I can't find my notes.
Just wing it.
No, okay, I really can't. Who is next? And oh, no, I found him, okay. Right, number 2, the League of Women Voters of Washington supports efforts to ensure everyone has access to information necessary for casting an informed ballot, and that credible local news sources are integral to this pursuit. I'm not going to spend a lot of time because it is in the report. Some of the studies that we looked at and referred to, as well as interviewing a number of publishers and others who talked about when we don't have access to local news, we have lower voter turnout, we have fewer candidates running for office. It is detailed pretty clearly in our study. But, you know, we believe that access to local news is important to our democracy, just as schools, public schools are important to our democracy, just as public libraries are important to our democracy. And that was where we were going with that one. Number 3, the League of Women Voters of Washington believes that support for the viability of local news may take a variety of forms, and that control of the content must remain exclusively with the news organizations. That's right. So in the case of, if there is passage of a legislation that would give tax breaks or tax credits to hire reporters, at no time would we could not support a position that would require government to ever have control over content, which was really important. And we want to talk about the variety of forms. We had a interview with a man named Rob Curley. Rob was at one point an assistant editor at the Washington Post, and he came back to the West Coast and took up the job of executive editor in Spokane at the Spokesman Herald. And he had a great quote. He says, when we're talking about newspapers, it doesn't matter about the word paper, but news is what we're concerned with. And that's the case. So if we're talking about online, or if we're talking about print, or we're talking about a hybrid, that's not the issue. The issue is the content of the material that's being reviewed. And we're seeing, you know, increasingly so, greater reliance strictly online. And, you know, I think to a certain extent, some of us are slow to give up the print edition, especially those of us who are getting older. But the reality is more and more news organizations are seeing that that is a very costly means of communicating news, and they're backing off on it. So we're going to see changes in that regard, and we need to respect what's coming online. The distinction between a news organization that adheres to the principles of the Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics versus social media. Joanne, you're number 4, aren't you?
I'm number 4. That's me. I am, obviously I pushed for this position because much of my interest has been in the idea that we would not be in this dilemma of the decline in local news in our country if we had not ignored the issue of media literacy in the 1980s. Much of the rest of the Western world has had a media literacy component as compulsory in primary and secondary schools since the 1980s. These countries if you notice, are not dealing with this problem of the loss in credibility and trust in local news that the US is. It's because young people and adults as well have learned how news works, how journalism works, and how if it's not credible, it doesn't show up, and how it is masterfully edited and determined to come up with truth and accuracy. And I'm going to hit again on the Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics. Nobody who isn't in the business, or few people who are not in the business, know how rigorous journalism works in this country. So I have advocated for probably almost 30 years now that if we demonstrate the value very early on to young people, how important it is to determine and deconstruct what they're attending to. They can be better consumers, and they also can be better citizens, because this position states that we need to find ways to support media literacy and news education so that everybody knows how the sausage is made and also how important that sausage is.
Mhm.
And I think, Deanne, are you doing number 5?
No, Carol is, and
Carol, oh, sorry,
Alice-
Carol.
Alice, we have 20 minutes according to my watch here. I don't know
Yeah.
how many questions are coming in. We want to certainly respect the fact that we have questions.
Well, I would go through the last position. I think
Okay.
that's the last one, right?
Right,
Is
we
that-
have one more.
Yeah, go ahead and through that, because it's,
Okay, Carol, maybe if you could do that briefly.
Let me read the position to you. This is point 5. The League of Women Voters of Washington believes that everyone should have access to comprehensive, credible local news, and that barriers to access should be removed. These barriers include, but are not limited to, geography, economic status, and education. Geographic barriers are very real. Every state has some kind of a barrier: mountain ranges, river valleys, extensive rural farmlands with a scattered population, coastal areas that include islands. And in order for people to get news in a print paper, you have to have a system of high quality, well-maintained road systems in every county. And then in our emerging online media era, all areas of the state need broadband access for digital news to reach each resident efficiently and equally. Economic barriers are an issue in preventing equal access to news everywhere, especially in our current economy with its intense and increasing income inequality. The rising cost of print papers puts them out of reach for middle income as well as low income households. The cost of internet service, the cost of computers and tablets also puts local news access out of reach for many, many people. Cell phone screens are not designed to read investigative journalism pieces. And that is critical since cell phones are how most people communicate now. The cost of producing print news continues to rise for publishers, and the initial investment cost of creating digital newspapers is prohibitive for smaller, locally owned newspaper publishers or for new enterprises, new entrepreneurial efforts to create a newspaper. It costs money. Educational barriers, to continue where Joanne left off with media literacy, which is critical. Everyone in households where newspapers are not a trusted source of information is more likely to dismiss local news as meaningful in any way. School systems that do not stress the importance of civic education, that do not teach how government works or how the actions of local government impacts every individual's life. This undermines the civic engagement not only of adults who are current voters, but our future voters.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you very much. Alice?
yep, we can start answering the questions that are in chat. If you can stop sharing your screen, that would be
Yeah.
good.
We have one question that we sort of answered, and Jane wanted to know this: you're asking for us to do concurrence at the LWV US convention this June in the other Washington, the one on this coast, right? But you wouldn't have any objection if League of Women Voters of Virginia at our convention 2 years from now, 25, also adopted it, you know, as a state position as well. You're not going to cry over that, but this is specifically to get LWV US to do concurrence, because then the other point is really moot, because once it's a state, it's a national position, then anybody can use it. So
That's our understanding of it. Yes, we want each state to have that option, and also that because, for instance, you may be aware there are 2 pieces of legislation on the congressional level right now. I mean, there's something it's Senator Amy Klobuchar introduced, and then more recently 2 congressional representatives. There's the Journalism Competition and Preservation Act, Preservation and Competition Act, and then the other one is now, it's called, instead of the Journalism Sustainability Act, it's called the Community News and Local Business Support Act. So, and these are on the federal level. We cannot advocate for them because there's no
US position.
US position. And one of those is dealing with the overtake by social media giants, where they come in and take the news content that local publishers produce and for not any and do not fairly compensate them. And I think, was it just this last week, I'm not sure if it was Columbia University, I hope somebody remembers, there was a study that concluded $13 billion a year is what newspapers were losing by the takeover of content on social media.
Mhm.
13, I want to 13, I should get my notes, but I'm pretty clear I'm not overspeaking to say 13 billion a year.
It's stealing content and not giving credibility, any kind of credit to the original reporters or the original documentation. And their argument is that, well, people won't get the news if we don't do that.
And in fact, you're seeing that Meta and others are cutting back on anything they're sharing, because if they can't share it without having to pay, they're going to cut everything out. And you saw that was happening in Canada. Australia, I think, because it was a first place legislation like this was attempted, there was an agreement reached, and social media giants, big tech giants did pay, were paying, and local newspapers and newspaper publishers. But now, as that ramps up, they're fighting back, and they know if this happens in the US, they're going to have to pay some big bucks.
It's a question that I think I know the answer to, but I'm not positive, to be quite honest with you. Could the local leagues adopt the position before LWV Virginia does? I don't believe that local leagues can adopt state positions, but I have to admit I'm not 100% sure on that.
And I don't know the
Alice?
answer. I don't know the answer either.
I know there's something funky. This came up a while ago about that, but Carrie, I'm going to find that answer out for sure. Because I remember somebody saying, in fact, it was the past president who said, state can adopt state, and of course, national's the overall, but local, I don't think can adopt state. But I'm going to get the exact information on that and make sure the presidents know that.
I'd love to know too.
Yeah, there's something funky in there that I can't jump up and say yes, because I remember hearing, but I will definitely get the answer.
But the reason we're doing this presentation today, educationally, to let you guys know, as a local league, when you do your program, your advocacy planning in January, you know, we're going to ask you if you could weigh in on agreeing with Washington State to ask the US to adopt this by concurrence at their convention. That's the minimum.
And once national adopts it, anybody can use it.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying.
Right.
It would be icing on the cake if Virginia adopted it as one of theirs in 2025, but it's technically not necessary, because once there's a national position, anybody can steal from it, you know, and use it. So,
and I do want to say that Colorado is taking a pulse of its membership. They were voting on Monday and Tuesday, and I think their balloting was due tomorrow. So you're not the only one. Fortunately, and we're hoping we'll get more states, and you know, this is all new to us. This is new to us. I've never done a study before, and so I'm learning as I'm going, and I'm thinking,
Right.
oh gosh, you know, oops, now I know about how to do this. But you know, we're hoping to get this message out to the other state leagues, and if you know anybody who's in a league in another state who's interested, we'd love to come and tell them about our work because we think it really is important.
We'll
Mhm.
get that sound thing fixed before then.
That's great. That's great.
Alice,
I hope.
Yes.
Alice, I just put the link for this morning's talk at from Northwestern and the Medill School of Journalism. It's in the chat, so you can share that if you want. It was only a 35-minute speech, but it was fabulous.
Great.
Any more questions?
There are no more questions that I can see in chat. I have one though. In addition to the tax idea, you know, we do have state income tax and whatever. What other, let's say, easier things can the states do to promote this?
Well, I think one of the big things is this push for news media literacy, because it really gets to the heart of,
Mhm.
oh, students know that we'll be learning that what they get on TikTok is not necessarily going to help them make good decisions as adults, right? It's going to help them recognize that it matters what's happening in the city, in city council. It's gonna help them understand that you have to do a little bit of research to find out if the candidate is who's good looking is also intelligent and will make decisions that help your family and your education. So I mean, I think that is really big, and Joanne's pushing for that and doing the whole promotion of that. There are other things, and we've gone to there is a fellow by the name of Steve Waldman, who actually, Steve originally created what's called Report for America, a nonprofit, and I think Lynn, you're up to speed on that. Do you want to talk about him and then talk about what Rebuild Local News is? You're on mute.
Sure, I don't have those notes in front of me. Steve Waldron, he formed this nonprofit, and then he's moved on, and now he's doing nationwide promotion for increasing the availability of local news. And his organization is looking at different solutions to that problem, different solutions to the broken funding model of typical newspapers that we all grew up with, where you buy ads or subscriptions and that funds the newspaper. And so he's looking at different models for funding local news, and he's doing that on a national level. He can, you know, drill down to specific foundations, philanthropy, but also other ideas, partial philanthropy with paid newspaper, different models that he's looking at.
One thing that I just thought of, for instance, in New York City, and this was an executive decision, that at one point leaders said, okay, we need to support local ethnic newspapers,
Mhm.
and made a rule that established that city agencies needed to, when it was efficient, they didn't tie their hands, but when it was efficient and when it would be a positive outcome, they required a certain amount of their advertising dollars that the city would spend to promote information about public health or about availability of swimming lessons at the neighborhood pool, that those notices be published in local ethnic news publications. And so it wasn't, they were going to spend the money anyway, but let's make sure we're not just putting it all on sending it to television stations that are going to charge more and that might not support broad efforts like
or just on social media. And I think that was the key, that it really helped enshrine in local law the desire to see some of that advertising dollar move from social media like Facebook advertising to the local print newspaper.
Right. And then there have been efforts to make it easier for a for-profit news publication to become a nonprofit, which we're seeing a greater instance of nonprofits delivering important information, particularly in niche markets, like maybe about emphasis on environmental reporting or education, etc. So I see Linda has a comment.
Well, I was just going to add on the state legislator that we interviewed wanted very specifically to know if the league had ideas about, content for legislation. And, it was like he didn't really know and wanted guidance from us. And so I think we've formed a group, Deanne, haven't we,
We're
to look
starting
into that.
after we win national concurrence. We're hoping this is going to happen, right? We're going to kind of switch our focus, and we're going to convene a brain trust in Washington of people who understand how to read the state budget, to know where there are dollars if we're looking to direct money somewhere, and publishers and people who've covered newspapers, et cetera. And we're going to convene a brain trust so we can come up with kind of a moonshot solution for Washington State. And we've been asked by a leading lawmaker to do that. And this is a state senator, by the way, talking about other things other than tax breaks. Senator Karen Kaiser, who represents an area south of South Seattle area. She found $2.4 million in the state budget and has worked to earmark that money to develop an early career journalism fellowship at Washington State University, which has an Edward R. Murrow School of Journalism, and it's very well established and renowned. And it's going to start by placing early career journalists in news publications in communities that are underserved in terms of their news access. So we're going to work with people who know how to find money or make decisions that make it easier for people to say, oh yeah, that is important, and we're going to get behind that.
It's good.
So
In
part of
Virginia,
what
our
the-
budget process is in secret. So
Right.
Part of what you league members can do is to educate your legislators.
Mhm.
yeah,
Right.
well, yeah.
Yes.
There is a question here. Does centralized ownership by multi-state companies remove a local newspaper from the definition of local newspaper? So several large entities are gobbling up local newspapers. So when they do that, that's no longer technically a local newspaper in your assessment, correct?
Well, actually, so for instance, we have 6 newspapers that were owned by a long-standing newspaper company, McClatchy Newspapers, and actually it's on the East Coast now too. I know in North Carolina. It was in Washington and California. It was purchased by a hedge fund. The hedge fund purchased it, but the publisher retained ownership as a local publisher. So they can fit the definition of a local newspaper because they've got an ownership and then they've got on the publisher side. So they will qualify, for instance, for the B&O tax exemption. One of the things we want to do is then meet with publishers to say, okay, this is the intent by the legislature, was to use those savings not to buy your brother-in-law a fancy new car, but to plow it back into the budget to protect jobs. And league putting that pressure, saying, hey, we're watching, pays off. And we realize that's something we want to do too as we get further along with the national concurrence effort. But you do have to say, hey, this is what we believe in, and this is what we're going to be watching how you do these things.
And to answer your question, in Bellingham, we have a McClatchy newspaper.
Mhm.
And what's happened over time is is less and less coverage of the local news, more and more coverage of the national news. So it decreased in terms of the percentage of local coverage, and many of them laid off their journalists that were covering things locally. So while they're not ghost newspapers, they're well on their way to becoming in many cases. So we're hoping that they will use some of the funds with this B&O exemption to devote that to local news, increasing local news.
And it's not going to be a big savings. I mean, we're talking about the Seattle Times, which is the largest newspaper in Washington. It's going to protect 3 full-time jobs. Where I'm at here in Southwest Washington, we have a pretty robust daily newspaper. It's been around for 100+ years, and it'll protect 1 full-time position. So there needs to be more needs to be done. When you think about this news today, that more than half of the counties in the country do not have access to good local news, or have very limited access. Think about how many city councils, how many school board decisions are not written about, how many local elected leaders are not, there's no watchdog. This is important to our democracy.
It's really really important, but unfortunately we have run out of time. I want to thank the 6 of you from Washington. This has been so helpful and so educational, and I know I've learned a lot, even though I have looked at the study. So we will give this, I hope, all the local leads some thoughtful consideration and follow what you're doing, and really appreciate your hard work in doing this study. Really appreciate it.
Please let us know if there's any way, we can, anything else we can do to get your support. We're happy to, provide it, and you have my contact information.
I do.
We're there.
All right.
Hope to see you in Washington, DC.
Yes. I hope we see you again. Yes.
Okay.
Quickly, they did
yeah.
put their
Yeah.
civics
Yeah.
link in there. Our Miss Dis task force is looking at civics. And so we're actually stealing from some of your ideas. So
Good, excellent.
Are you familiar with our book?
Carol put it in the state we're in. Carol put it in the chat. We have a civics book that is produced every year and distributed to all of the statewide schools. It's in the process of being, I think it might have already been translated into Spanish, and now we're talking about other languages as well.
Right, Mandarin. Yeah.
Excellent. That's just excellent. So much good information.
But you can download the book for free.
Yeah, on OSPI for office.
So you can send that, you can send that to your state education department.
I'm going to, one little thing. I recently read a profile or a memoir by Representative Katie Porter, who is a congressional rep from Southern California. And she was writing about how so many people who are elected to Congress do it and get a lot of money, right? They become richer, they're rich and they become richer. And what I think about with the League is how we're predominantly the women who are doing all this good work for nothing. I mean, no pay, right? We're not getting anything.
I know.
But it's that passion and that's belief in that it's important and good, and it's not about money, I think is going to make it so we all work together. And
yes, the purpose of life is a life of purpose. And you're all,
good one.
You are all meeting that.
Mic drop, Alice. Mic drop.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank
really
you.
appreciate
Remember
it.
to give newspaper subscriptions for holiday presents.
Good idea. Good idea.
Take care, guys.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everyone.